Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone from the 1980s. This is Season 1, Episode 18. There's 3 stories in this episode. They are called Gramma, as in grandmother. Gramma. It says like I'm saying grammar, as in spelling and grammar. Gramma. I need an American accent to sell that pronunciation. Gramma. Anyway, Personal Demons is the second story, and Cold Reading is the third story. This is a Patreon sponsored review, so thank you to Cindy for picking the show. This episode is kind of mostly just fine. Throughout the first 2 stories, I was kind of just feeling like, okay, these aren't bad. They're okay. There's a nice enough idea in here, but I wasn't feeling super enthusiastic. I do think the third story actually ended up being a bit of a standout, and I was going to say it was the first time that the last story is the one that uplifted it, but I don't think that's true. I think the one about the Vietnam vet in the diner, I think that was the last story that uplifted that episode. So I guess I'm not even right in my thinking there, but it feels like it's been a while though. I think there's been a lot of episodes where it's the first story is the good one, and then it's just kind of some okay stuff afterwards. Or indeed the middle story, but I feel like this is the first time in a while where the last story's been the one that has kind of stood out a little bit. And it's not like a super deep story, the last one, by any means. Cold Reading is not some deep, science fiction kind of idea. It's just kind of a fun, adventurous idea that is handled fairly well. It's a cool little gimmick. But we'll get to that at the end, obviously. We'll start with the Gramma, as in grandma. Again, when I try and say it the way it's written, I just feel like I'm saying a different word. But this is about a young boy who's scared of spending time alone with his grandmother. And his grandmother is like bedridden, and she's down the end of the hall. The mother's leaving to go visit the kid's brother who's in the hospital. He broke his leg or something like that. And he's saying, no, I'm not scared of her anymore. It's fine. I can be left alone. But then the entire story is about how he is scared of her, how any noise he hears coming from her room kind of freaks him out. When he does go to her room to like give her some tea, because she kind of asks for it, he flinches and drops everything the second her hand pops out from under the bed covers. So it's very much that. And the big thing with this really is that there's a lot of inner head narration, and not even just narration, but like flashbacks. So the kid narrates a lot about what he's thinking. Sometimes he imagines voices talking to him, like his doctor or his grandmother's doctor, sort of giving him advice, and he kind of responds like he's talking to them. But then sometimes he also just thinks about his mother having conversations with her siblings, his aunts and uncles, about the grandmother. And it sounds like they've had hush-hush conversations about how they all think their mother is terrible or something, and it's kind of added to this fear that he has of her, that they're all worried and kind of hoping that she dies soon because they can finally be free of her. But the big reveals come when he ends up sneaking into the room and opening up a panel on the floor which reveals a couple of books, one of which is the Necronomicon. So that's fun. He can't read that though. He thinks it's in some ancient language like French. That was a line of dialogue. Well, it was a line of narration, I suppose I should say. And then the other one's like a diary, and he basically discovers that his grandmother is a witch and is, again, more scared of her. Ultimately, when he goes back he goes back a couple of times, and each time something freaks him out and makes him run away. But the big ending to it is that he goes to the room, and he thinks she's dead. He's like tried the mirror in front of the breath to see if she's breathing. He checked her pulse. But the voice in his head says, hey, you should go back and like check her again and put the sheets over her face. That's the right thing to do. And he doesn't really want to do it. He's worried at this point that he's going to be blamed for her death because he was the one that was left alone with her, even though she's just a really old lady who's died. It's not really. This isn't like you're babysitting and you've let the kid get a hold of the scissors or something. This is just an old person passed away. But the big ending is that she pops up and grabs him, and she's got there's a lot of prosthetic makeup on her face to make her look real, because we've not seen her the whole story, right? She's always been off camera, under the covers, it's all been left to the imagination. But towards the end here, we see that she's got like this really sort of awful looking face with all these, bumps and just demonic, I guess would be the word. And she grabs him and the lightning flashes and all the rest of it, and it's a big thing. And the end of the story is that when his mother comes home, he's sitting there at the table in the kitchen like he has been for a lot of the episode, and he tells his mum that she died, and she holds him close and says it's not his fault, she's just old and that she'll always be with us. And the final moment is the kid's eyes light up red, just like the grandmother's eyes did when she was grabbing him in the previous scene. So the implication at the end is effectively that the grandmother has possessed her grandson, that she is continuing her evil spirit in one of her descendants. That was the basic gist of it. There's some fun little things, like, it's kind of over the top in how, like, because they could have done like a more serious version of this. Not that I was expecting some like gritty thing from this story, but I could definitely see one that's a lot more kind of grounded in the fear of the old person. This definitely plays it between the narration and then some of the insane, well, not insane, that's maybe a harsh word, but some of the visuals which are a bit more cartoony. For example, the hidden panel on the floor in the bedroom that has the books in it, when he goes to open that, there's like, it's like there's like a red light popping up from underneath this panel, right? So you get like mist coming out of it, and it's like a red light. So it's like a spooky kids TV show kind of effect with, and he goes over and is like, oh my god, is that hell? Am I seeing the light from hell coming up from there? And then he goes, no, it's cold. He puts his hand over it. But it's all very kind of over the top and kind of pantomime and, you know, big kind of, you know, big over the top effects and the lighting and that kind of thing to kind of sell it as a fun, like, this story would not be out of place on a more kid focused show, you know, like a Goosebumps or a Are You Afraid of the Dark. Like, I could totally see this story being on one of those more kid friendly shows that's intended for like preteens and teenagers to watch, and it's okay as that. I think for me it never, like, I never really quite got into the idea of the fear of the grandmother. I don't know if there was just never like, I think had it just been more, I guess I wanted more grounded. I guess for me it was a little bit too pantomime for me to ever really get into it. I think if it had been maybe a slightly younger kid who was legitimately just scared of his grandmother, and it seemed like she was just normal the whole time, but the way it's filmed and the way it's treated, even if it was going to turn out at the end that she is just normal and he is just being a dumb kid, it still presented it in a way where it's like, no, we're seeing it from the perspective of his mind, of how, like, how he's envisioning how spooky this bedroom is that he's going into and how scared he is of going to it. And that in some ways is the right choice. Like, I get why they made that choice. Like, artistically, I understand seeing it from his perspective. I absolutely do. But I wouldn't say that that's necessarily the take on this story. I mean, maybe it's just as simple as I needed more of the kid, like more of the kid's character. I mean, like, maybe I needed to get to know the kid a little bit better. But he's only ever really defined by how he feels about his grandmother. Like, maybe, you know, there's a brief little bit at the start when he's sort of talking about his brother. And it's like, oh, maybe this should be more about an arc for him. And I think that's the thing I was maybe hoping for, is that there was going to be like a little arc, like something for him to get over. And it's not really about the fact that he's scared of his grandmother, but he's scared of his grandmother's kind of like an allegory for something that he's actually scared of in growing up, or something like that. Or, you know, I was kind of looking for a little bit of extra meaning behind something with the kid, and I don't know if I ever quite got that. At the end, it just kind of felt like, hey, isn't it spooky? The witch grandmother took over. And even once they started implying that the parents, like, kind of knew she was, like, there was something wrong with her, and it's getting worse because she's getting senile, and they're all kind of scared of her. I could have really have done with maybe some more of that somehow, but I also don't know if just hearing these old conversations in the kid's head was necessarily the right play for that either. I don't know if I liked how that information was given to me. But would I have wanted flashbacks? Would I have wanted them to actually just cut back to these other scenes? I mean, maybe. I mean, I like that more. But it's a mixed bag. Like, I don't hate it. Like, I think it's perfectly fine. I understand the choices they made. I just don't think it quite came together in a way that I would have enjoyed this core concept that they were going for. But you know, not the worst by any means either. So I think part of this is just down to taste for this first story for me, but I didn't love it. So the second story is Personal Demons. And I actually just saw the actor in this, Martin Balsam, whatever. I don't know how you pronounce his last name. But he's in 12 Angry Men. He's juror number 1 in 12 Angry Men. But I actually just saw him in another movie. I watched the original taking of Pelham 123 just last night, and he's in that. And that was about a decade or so before this. So I've actually seen him like at different stages over like this 30 plus year career he's had. But he plays a writer in this, like a TV show writer. And the story even starts with like a bunch of like scripts for different TV shows that he's got pinned on his wall, and they're all real shows, right? It's a Dukes of Hazzard logos on one of them. One's got a Gunsmoke logo and a few other like old shows, some of which I recognize, some of which I didn't. I'm assuming they're all real though, because they had some real ones that I did recognize. So why wouldn't the rest of them be real? In fact, I only really know what Gunsmoke is because the original Twilight Zone sometimes had like built-in promos for other shows on CBS, even on like the Blu-ray or because I started watching it on the Blu-rays and then I switched to the iTunes version at one point. So I don't know if the iTunes versions have it, but they'd have like promos for either that or some of the other sitcoms that were on the network. So that was one of the only reasons why I actually even know what that show is. Anyway, so this is about a writer who's been writing for a long time. You know, he's an older guy, he's in his 60s or whatever, and he's nearing the end of his career, and he's struggling. He's frustrated because he feels like he's not had an original idea in a long time. He feels like he's just recycling the same stories over and over again, and he wants to have one more original idea before he goes. You know, he's a friendly guy, he's nice to his neighbors who want to steal some batteries or steal a drink from his fridge, and he casually talks to them. Seems like a nice enough guy. He's just frustrated because he wants to have one more original good story in him. And the basic premise as the story unfolds is that he starts seeing these little gremlins, or I guess I'll say personal demons, since that's the name of the episode. But it reminded me a lot of the little like druid-looking characters from Phantasm. If you've ever seen the Phantasm movies, like the tall man has these little like, I don't know, slaves, I guess, but they wear these like hoods. They're also a little bit like the oh god, what are the name of those things in Star Wars that steal R2D2 in the first movie? I've forgotten their name, but anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is they're the little demonic looking dudes in these hoods. I assume these are mostly children with masks on, or maybe they are just little people, but either way, he starts seeing one as he's going to his car. He later sees some wrecking his car from his window, and he tries to tell other people who are over to watch the episode on TV that he wrote, and no one else can see them. He's with his agent in a restaurant, and he can see these demons coming for him, and no one else can see them, but he starts freaking out. And it keeps escalating to the point where he's in his apartment, and he's like boarded up the windows, he's trying to keep them out, he's kind of freaking out. He's still a nice enough, likable guy, but he's like really like digging in deep here and doesn't want to have to deal with this. And this is kind of the short middle story, but it actually gets a decent amount of time. If anything, it's actually longer on the last episode, the last story, because the last story I think is only about... Oh, no, this one's short. This one's about 10 minutes, and the last one's about 15. First one's about 20. So it's not like it's kind of an evenish split for this episode. Nothing is super long or super short. But it ends with these personal demons, like, sort of coming in through the windows, getting to him. He sort of backs up, and he ends up sitting in his chair next to his typewriter. And he just begs and says, "Why are you here? I just want, like, what can I do so that you'll stop following me and stop coming after me? I just want you to go." And one of them finally speaks and says, write about us, and you'll never see us again." And the story, when it was starting and he was complaining about how he doesn't know what to write, his friend, who's not a writer, just sort of brings up, "Oh, I read in an article that, you know, writers should write what they know." And he's like, "I've only known writing for 30 years. That's all I've been doing. I don't have any other experiences." And so basically what this story is this idea that a writer should use their art, their writing, to sort of work through their issues, right? Their personal demons. That's literally what the episode is called. So it's the idea that his personal demons have manifested into actual demons who are coming after him, and they'll just go away if he writes about them. That by writing about them, sort of exploring what they are, and kind of accepting these demons, he will be able to move on from them. And as the story ends with him starting to write, and one by one the demons start fading away around him. So it's a pretty straightforward little message. I like the concept of this a little bit more than the first story. I like the actor well enough as well. I think it is a bit simple. There was never like an extra layer to it that made me go, oh, this is really smart. It was just kind of a nice little idea that I think is pretty solid. And that's about it. Like, I don't have like a great deal to say about it other than it was a pleasant enough 10 minutes of my time. But I appreciated the overall idea behind it. And I think, maybe what would have elevated it a little bit is the idea if we even get a sense of what some of his personal demons actually were. Like some of these things that have actually been bothering him that he's going to write about. But that would be a longer story, obviously. That wouldn't just be 10 minutes. That would be, a full thing exploring who the character is and what he's been avoiding writing about for all these years. This stuff that he's been scared to talk about. That would have, elevated it quite a bit, I think, and taken it that big step further into being a more meaty story. But as a 10-minute story, it was a solid all time. Cold Reading, the final story, is set in the 1940s, back when radio plays and radio dramas were a popular thing, and it focuses on this. I mean, at first it focuses on this character who's like filling in for one of the voice actors. Who they do a whole thing at the start where he's not been let in the building by the guy because he's not on a list. But then the kind of over the top director, auteur, comes in and says, "Get your hands off that actor!" And to be honest, the line delivery of that line was fantastic. He is exactly the pompous, I live for my art type of douchebag that you want in a role like this. But yeah, so basically quite quickly, it's like, hey, you're filling in for this guy because he got sick. Come up. The script's been changed. All those lines you've memorized are useless. Here's the new script. We're not doing any rehearsals. We're going in cold, hence the title Cold Reading. All of this is just kind of set up, though. It's almost like they knew this needed to fill 15 minutes, so they had to have like 5 minutes of like build up to what the episode actually is, when they really could have just started with them walking into the recording booth and just like starting from there, because none of the stuff that happened before that I think really matters to the rest of it. But luckily, once they get into that booth and the real concept of this episode comes to life, it's really good stuff. Because the director is talking to his assistant or the producer or whoever it is, and he's saying, "Oh, like I really wish, like I'm sick of these fake sound effects. I wish we could have the real things in the studio." Because it's like it's a radio drama, so there's like a Foley guy who's doing like various things to make these. He's got like a little record player for some of the animal noises they need. And he's got like the metal sheets for the thunder and all that. He's doing all the typical things you might have seen whenever you've seen this kind of thing shown off in a TV show. The thing that I always go to in my mind is they did an episode of Frasier where they did like a radio drama as like a 1-episode thing, and I remember like all the doohickeys and Foley effects that was in that. But so he says that. He says, "I wish we had the real things." So the gimmick of this story is that once it gets going, and the whole drama's about, it's like it's like an Indiana Jones type explorer type drama. It's a group of characters, adventurers going through Africa. And as they start to say things from the script, some of the things start to appear in the room. So they mentioned, the sound of a bird or a crow or something like that. And the Foley guy plays the noise, but then after he's done that, he looks up and there's a bird just on one of the chairs. And some of them notice it and they're like, "Wait, there's a bird in the studio. What the hell? We can't have that." And they kind of, freak out a little bit. They look over, but they keep going. The actors try and maintain their composure. They've got the sort of the narrator who's also driving the story and the radio play. But then they start talking about a storm. But it's getting rainy. It's a storm. And sure enough, rain starts to fill into the room, and there's like a very extreme wind. Their clothes are blowing all over the place, so they're actually struggling to speak into the microphones as all this weather's hitting them. And the director is just like, "Yes, this is the best thing ever. This is authentic. This is amazing." And and they keep going with the gimmick, and they take it to some really fun, natural conclusions. Like, for example, at one point they have to stop for the ad read, right? So the narrator says, "Before we continue with this adventure, let me tell you about this new cereal." And literally, as he's talking about it, a floating bowl of cereal appears in the air, and a jug of milk starts to pour into it, and they're all just sort of standing there with their mouths like wide open, being like, what the hell? And the fun for this for me is really when they start to expect things to show up, because they start to get a little bit worried, or they start to like sort of brace themselves because they're realizing they're saying something they don't like. And the weather is getting more and more extreme. It may be before the ad break bit, but eventually I think it's the my impression was that they ad-libbed this because they wanted the weather to stop. So the woman of the three actors is like, oh, and the rain starts to let up. The storm is going away, it's subsiding. And sure enough, the rain and the wind stop, and they all just sort of smile, and she goes, and look, the sun is coming out, and the room brightens up. And it's like, oh, they're going to start actually kind of manipulating it. But when they get back into things, and they mention, look, there's like tribal drums being played, so all of a sudden there's like a tribal guy behind them with a drum just beating away on it. And stuff keeps going, there's a little bit of a time skip, and when we come back, there's multiple birds, there's like actually trees and foliage all down one side of the studio. Really just fun concept for a story, but then it gets to the juicy part, which is the producer turns to the director and says, wait, have you forgotten about what's on page 7? And he's like, well, what's on page 7? He's like, there's a plane crash on page 7. And he's like, what do you think? We're inside. Nothing's going to happen. Nothing bad will happen. And she's like, yeah, but rain's usually on the outside. And sure enough, as they're saying this, they're having this debate about, is it safe for us to do certain things that are in the script now because they keep appearing? They mention gunshots in the play, and this shotgun just appears, or a rifle just appears in midair and fires a shot. It doesn't hit anyone, but they all freak out, of course. They're all scared. And this is when the director finally realizes, oh no, we have to rewrite that page quickly. So he's like just quickly writing down, like, oh, we thought the plane was going to go down, but it was able to save at the last second. So he runs out and like shows this page to the people, and he turns to his producer and says, hey, look for anything else that's dangerous in the script. We have to change it. And she's like, you mean the earthquake on page 12? Yeah, that's a good place to start. So it skips ahead in time. I think this is when all the foliage comes in, and you see that, okay, a bunch of other things have appeared as time has went on. The story's wrapping up. And like everyone's like sweating. And it basically is this idea of like anything can happen in live radio. Why they do these live is, a mystery to me. Because it's not like there's any benefit from like a drama being live, but this idea that, oh, you have to think on your feet, and even when the sort of the fill-in actor, right, the part-timer comes in at the start, and he's talking to the other actors for like a quick second, it's like, hey, they'll cover up if we need help with some music or something, right? And they're like, oh no, the director wouldn't want to ruin his reputation like that. Like, we have to do everything live. We have to think on our feet. We have to get through this. So the idea that they literally, it's not just that they forget a line or there's a slight hiccup from a technical thing or something that they have to cover for. They get thrown with all this literal things happening to them and still have to try and read their dialogue and get through the story and think on their feet. And the ending's a lot of fun as well, because the ending is, they've gotten through it, they're all sort of breathing a sigh of relief. Even the director, who was all for it initially, is like, oh god, that was a lot of work, but he's like, oh, that was art, we did something special there. And the actors are all just excited because they're wrapping up the story. They goes to the narrator, who closes out the program, and he's saying, and that's the adventures of who and so this week, blah blah blah. And then he says, and join us next week. And just as he starts saying that, it cuts to the director. He's like, no, don't say it. And he's sort of grasping his hair. Don't say it. And the narrator, without thinking about it, finishes his outro and says, and join us next week where we start a new adventure about invaders from Mars. And then everyone in the room just looks scared. And the narrator even realizes, oh no, I shouldn't have said that. And they all look around, they hear a noise, and the story ends with a spaceship kind of crashing in through one wall in the studio. And that's where the episode fades out to black. Like, this one isn't super deep by any means, but it's just such a fun concept for an episode that is based on like some truth, right? It's like I said, like this idea that you're doing stuff live and sometimes stuff can happen. And the performers, whoever's working on the show, have to think in their feet to cover for it. They have to talk in the rain. They have to do whatever. This is taking that and turning it more extreme, right? More literal, like, oh no, anything can happen in live radio, like rain and storms and gunshots and like all these things will really happen, but no matter what, the show has to go on. And they start having to rewrite the show around how dangerous this new set of rules they're working under is. And then the ending's just a lot of fun because it's like, oh, like, it's one thing for us to conjure up like wildlife and trees and water and things like that from our part of the planet. But what happens when you say aliens show up? So, it's just a fun story. It's just a really fun one. It kind of perked me up when I was feeling just kind of so-so on the other two. I don't know if it's good enough that it'll end up on my top 5 or 10 at the end of the season for stories. It may sneak on there. It's not impossible, depending on what everything else I look at and consider, and whatever's left to come in the season, of course. But as far as just like a fun little story goes, I had a good time with this. And a lot of it was the actors or the over-the-top director like panicking and realizing that we have to change things, we have to work under this, we have to somehow adapt to this. That was the fun. And if you've ever done any kind of most people won't have done like a live broadcast per se, TV or radio wise, but even if you ever like in school, you ever did like the end of school concert show or something like that, where there's a bunch of different acts and you're kind of maneuvering all the things on and off the stage and stuff like that, and like some hiccups happen and we have to stall, or you have to run to the stage and move something or whatever. Like, that kind of energy is what this story's about, and for that, it's actually a lot of fun and just takes it up to 11. So, yeah, there you go. That's my thoughts on this episode of The Twilight Zone. Okay overall, but with a particularly fun third story to liven things up a little bit. So, I had a good time. I'm also noticing Stephen King is credited here in the writers for this story, which is interesting. So yeah, the first one, the grandmother story, was based on a short story by Stephen King, and the teleplays by Harlan Ellison. It's a shame I didn't love that one because that's like 2 big names tied to that. So that's fun. Also, the writer of the story about the writer was actually named the same as the character, which is Rockne S. O'Bannon, which is, I guess, also fun. So cool. Anyway, that is the review. Thank you very much for joining me, everyone. Let me know what you thought of these stories in the comments if you've watched the episode. Like, subscribe, ding the bell, and of course you can support everything over at Patreon and help keep the reviews coming, so please do go have a look. All the Male Fuzz Movies podcasts all have bonuses that appear on Patreon. Go check out that channel if you want to see the movie podcast and see if you're into some of them. Sci-fi movie podcast, the Atomic Cinema Experiment, might be the one that's the most appealing based on the fact that you like Twilight Zone. But that is me, so thank you once again. I'll see you guys next time. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.